The founding of Bismarck, Edwinton, and its rival tent cities on History Talk, where we look at the people, places, and events that shaped our community. History Talk streams exclusively Thursdays at 10 a.m. on KFYR+. Bismarck was a city destined to be great, with grand ambitions that touted it as the next Omaha or even the next Chicago. It had the components to realize that ambition, located at the crossroads of the two major highways of the era, the Missouri River and the Northern Pacific Railroad. It was believed to become a major shipping port for raw goods from the northern frontier to the Mississippi and Great Lakes to the east and south, and the Pacific to the west. At the time, timber and fur were chief goods harvested from the area. Soon, gold and coal were discovered in abundance. Then agriculture took off to become the state's primary economic driver. It is because of its ambitious future that drew some of the best characters to the region, people who would leave a lasting mark upon history for not only Bismarck and North Dakota, but the entire world. As a result, Bismarck's history and influence are grander than a city of its size ought to be. Unfortunately, a nationwide economic depression striking only the year after Bismarck's founding stunted its ambitious growth, preventing it from becoming the mega metropolis it was predicted to become. This is the earliest known photograph of Bismarck, taken in 1873, the year after Bismarck was founded as the town of Edwinton. It shows a collection of ramshackle buildings along Main Avenue that were erected quickly and cheaply and easily relocatable. Northern Pacific Railway, which formed to connect the Great Lakes to the Pacific Ocean, established the town of Edwinton in May 1872, which became Bismarck the following year. It was selected to be the point where its northern transcontinental railway would span the Missouri River, where steamboat traffic was already prevalent. The town was originally known as simply the Crossing, or the Point, until being named for Edwin Johnson, the chief engineer of Northern Pacific, who championed the road. You will notice that Northern Pacific principles were the namesake for many of the area's cities, counties, streets, and landmarks. The location of Bismarck is not where Northern Pacific originally intended it to be, and one of several competing townsite claims that lasted several years, thwarted by greedy opportunists claiming adverse possession, colloquially known as squatters' rights, who staked land claims along the projected railroad route. The original crossing was to be at the mouth of the Heart River. This would have positioned Bismarck directly across from what is now known as Fort Abraham Lincoln, roughly 3.5 miles south from its eventual establishment. At least 3 encampments competed to become recognized as the official town. One, of course, was Edwinton. As the town founded and sanctioned by Northern Pacific, one would assume its official capacity could not be challenged. In actuality, the story is rather complicated. There was much confusion as to which town was official, and whether land rights could be protected. Nevertheless, Edwinton was the last of the tent cities to stake a claim, and initially swallowed by the competing tent cities, also called embryo cities, in an 1872 Sioux City Journal article, Carlton and Burleigh City, which already housed more than 200 people by the time Edwinton was founded, with businesses to support them. Carlton, named for Charles Carlton Coffin, mostly formed organically along the riverbank of the original planned crossing, directly across from what was then called Fort McKean, by prospectors asserting land claims of about 6 miles of riverfront. One man did have sinister motivations, John Jackman, who was financed by competing railroad tycoon James Hill. Jackman and his gang arrived only hours ahead of Colonel George Sweet, Northern Pacific's agent in charge of selecting a town site. Jackman had planted himself into Sweet's party to gain knowledge of Northern Pacific's plans. A reported 15 saloons and several homes of, quote, questionable use were located inside Carlton, giving the settlement such ill-famed nicknames as Whiskey Point, Point Pleasant, and Lookout Point. To the east, on or near the present-day site of Bismarck Airport, Dr. Walter Burleigh, who was contracted to grade the 50-mile line westward to the river, leveraged his knowledge to assert land and form Burleigh City. While Carlton was first and bigger, Burleigh City appears to have been better developed. A newspaper article from June 27th of that year referenced such streets as Greeley Avenue and Durfee Square inside the town, and it's even marked on a map from 1872 along the original railroad route. A Sioux City Journal article from September 7, 1872, highlights the townsite confusion in a rather whimsical manner, seemingly based on slightly inaccurate details while confusing the situation further. It describes Edwinton being laid out around a square called Camp Hancock, laid out by a man the article amusingly describes as, quote, styling himself Colonel Smith, assumingly referring to Colonel George Sweet, who was Northern Pacific's agent in charge of selecting a town site. Speaking of Edwinton, its enterprising citizens have been obliged to move 6 or 8 times within as many weeks. The article continues, 3 weeks ago, all had settled down to laugh and grow fat and rich, but the bubble has burst. The article alleges that Sweet sold overvalued lots in Edwinton before realizing it had no steamboat landing, at which point the lot values diminished, quote, lower than ever did Confederate money at the close of the war. The article proclaimed the thriving village of Burleigh City as the, quote, important point on the upper Missouri, at the expense of Edwinton. One problem with this conclusion is that Burleigh City didn't have a steamboat landing either, being even more inland than Edwinton. It was Carlton that was located directly along the riverbank. Regardless, it states that Sweet resorted to offering squatters upwards of $1,000 for land 3 miles south in Burleigh City, who rejected offers under the gaze of, quote, a wide-awake Dr. Burleigh, surveying the town site bearing his name. Sweet, who had no legal remedy against squatters, retreated to a new site where Edwinton, now Bismarck, was established, and the railroad shifted north. More than 150 years later, we have the city of Bismarck. Easy enough explanation, right? Well, that only scrapes the surface. While Northern Pacific Railway had chosen its town site and adjusted its railroad course accordingly, land claim disputes continued for years. Many questioned if Edwinton could endure against the competition. Then there's the question of Northern Pacific's motivation to relocate the railroad north. Competing land claims certainly could have done that. Then again, it may have been less costly to keep the original route and pay off land claims. After all, grading work had already been completed almost to the river along the original route. Most importantly, bridging the river at the original crossing would have been far less expensive. It's the reason that point was selected to be the crossing in the first place. Could something as simple as a heavy mosquito population have prompted Northern Pacific to establish its town more inland? That's one suggestion. Lowland flooding was quite likely another motivation to relocate the railroad. Flooding in that area remained problematic until the completion of Garrison Dam in the 1950s. In another twist, it's been suggested that Northern Pacific always intended for its route in encompassing town to be where they ended up being, and the alternative was a ruse to thwart squatters in the first place from their actual target. While that may make for a great plot in a story, the fact remains that it was easier and cheaper to span the river at the original crossing. Furthermore, what we now know as Fort Abraham Lincoln was established near the original crossing to protect railroad interests. Confused? So were people back then. No one knew which city would endure. The earliest structures were made to be portable, with the expectation that they may have to relocate. Newspaper accounts during the time seemed just as confused, with varying accounts to the authenticity of the actual town, and even mistakenly interchanging the sprouting cities. Regardless, the prospector's stratagem ultimately backfired, and the town that is now known as Bismarck endured as the sanctioned city. Lots located along the original route, once worth hundreds of dollars, suddenly were worth pennies. The isolated Burleigh City failed quickly, but Carlton, benefiting from nearby Fort Abraham Lincoln, prospered for some time. One source says that Carlton was wiped out by flooding in 1874, but another source suggests it lasted much longer. Camp Hancock, originally known as Camp Greeley, was the first permanent settlement in what became Bismarck. The site still contains one of the original buildings. Formally occupied on August 8, 1872, 3 months after the town's founding. It was a supply depot and infantry post to support construction of the railroad. Check out the History Talk segment on Camp Hancock for more of its history. I invite you to check out my 2 Bismarck history books. They are available to purchase on Amazon and select local bookstores. Copies are also available at the Bismarck Public Library. Visit bismarckbook.com for more information. That was a look at the founding of Bismarck and its competing tent cities. Next, we'll continue the discussion to look at how Bismarck's promising future was dampened by its second year, just as the railroad arrived.